right, everyone. I have Julie Eshelman here with me today. She is an IVF mom and an Army Reserve spouse of 9 years. She's the founder, CEO, and president of Building Military Families Network. And she's here today to tell her story about her 8-year journey with infertility and her journey to becoming a mom and everything in between. So welcome, Julie.
Thanks for having me, Becca.
Of course. I'm so excited to chat with you today. And Julie and I got to know each other. We were able to chat a little bit before we did this podcast interview. So I know a little bit of her story, and I'm just excited to have her share it with you today. Okay, so I just want to start out by I like to ask this question because I think it's really interesting to have background. So my question is, when you were like a little girl, did you always want to be a mom, or what was like your idea of becoming a mom when you were little? Is it something that came on later in life or something that you always wanted?
It's definitely something that I always wanted. As I got older, I had, career plans and, aspirations and dreams, but I always knew that I wanted to have kids. And growing up, my mom was always kind of one of the older moms. So I envisioned that, I would be done having kids before I was 30. Um,
Mhm.
but life didn't work out that way. We got married, a little bit later. We got married in our late 20s. And so having kids before we were 30 just didn't really work out. And then we never realized how hard it would actually be.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so tell me, like, how did you meet your husband? When did you get married? Give me all of that information.
Yeah. Well, so my husband and I actually met around this time of the year, all the way back in 2009, when we were both students at James Madison University. And, we've kind of come full circle in that journey, because we are now stationed at James Madison University. My husband is teaching ROTC, at the same program he went through.
Oh,
But
wow.
so, we met, back in college, and, he was in the ROTC program. And, he commissioned, and I kind of followed him. And,
Okay.
we moved out to the Seattle Tacoma area because he was stationed at Fort Lewis. And from there, we just we were there for about 7 years. And during that time, we continued dating, we got engaged, we got married. And then we've lived all over the country since then.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay. So when you guys got married, what was your timeline? What did your timeline look like for having children? Did you want to start right away? How did you envision that?
You know, we wanted to take a year to just enjoy like married life, because we'd been
Mhm.
dating for so long. And we didn't want to have the pressure of that. And I don't know, I mean, looking back at that, like, I don't really know why we thought we needed that year. I mean, I think society told us that we needed that year to wait, like, because it's what a lot of people do. And I mean, and it was good because we had saved all this money for our wedding. It gave us a year to save up to have a baby. So, in hindsight, it was good, but at the same time, we didn't realize how long it was going to take. So I feel silly for have waiting, but
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
can't
Absolutely.
change it
Okay.
and can only move
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah. So you waited about a year to
Yeah.
start trying. So go ahead and tell me about that kind of like first year or so trying to conceive and what that looked like for you, and maybe like what was your mindset going into that? Did you think when you started trying, did you think like, oh, this is going to happen right away, or it
Oh
might
yeah.
take a little
We,
bit of time? Okay.
we definitely thought like, oh man, we've been told like our whole lives, getting pregnant is so easy. You have to practice safe sex because, that
Mhm.
one time you have sex, without protection, you're going to get pregnant, right? That's what society always told us.
Right.
And so that first year, we expected that it was going to happen right away. And
Mhm.
then when it didn't, It was probably about 6 months into that, we're kind of like, maybe there's something wrong. This
Right.
isn't working. It's supposed to be easy, right? Um,
Right.
didn't really know much about, infertility or anything like that because nobody was talking about it back then. And, then when we hit that 1 year mark, well, we were also getting ready to move for the first time in my husband's career. And so we had spent 7 years in the Seattle Tacoma area. And then at the same time, we were hitting that 1 year mark where we could go and talk to somebody and maybe find out why we weren't getting pregnant. We were preparing for a move instead. Um,
Yeah.
and so then, after we had kind of hit that 1 year mark, we moved from Washington State down to the Phoenix metro area in Arizona. And basically had to start all over again there because the doctors, when we, went to be seen and explained that we were having trouble getting pregnant, well, they were like, well, but you guys really weren't together
Oh,
because my husband was traveling a lot in the position that
right.
he had in that year prior. And so he really wasn't there during my fertile window.
Yeah.
And so they were like, well, that year doesn't really count. And
That's
I'm like,
frustrating.
but it does. Like, it doesn't say that you have to be together for your fertile window. It just says if you've been trying for a year, right? Like that's,
Right.
so the nuances of that and not knowing how to advocate for my own healthcare, became kind of a struggle, in that we wasted a whole second year trying and then he
Uh-huh.
deployed.
Right. Were you told, so did you go ahead and try to seek like fertility counseling before that year was up, or were you told you have to try for a year
We
and
were
then
told we had to
get
wait.
some
Yeah,
help?
we were told we had to wait for the year. Then when we got set up, with new doctors, they were like, well, that year wasn't really a year.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. What would you what would your advice be to people who maybe are going through that want to get testing, but they're being told to wait a year to
Um,
seek that
I mean, I would
testing?
definitely, you know, if you, look at what the guidelines are out there, if you are over the age of 35 and you've been trying for 6 months unsuccessfully, go get that help.
Mm-hmm.
If you are
Right.
under 35 and it's been that 12 months, go get that and be your own advocate. If you feel
Yeah.
like there's something wrong, you know, go get that. Go get that help, go get a second opinion,
Right.
the things that I wish I would have done. And I wish I would have advocated a little bit more, we're a very unique situation. And I could
Mm-hmm.
have advocated for that better. Well, we're a military family. I don't always get to be with my husband and we're getting ready for a deployment. Like, I don't want to waste another year. And
Mm-hmm.
so
Right.
that's my
Yeah.
advice.
Yeah. I would agree with that too. Like if you're being told you can't have fertility testing, there's always going to be a doctor that will be willing to do that
Mhm.
testing. So find that doctor that is willing to help you with what you need. So I think that's great advice. Okay. Do you mind sharing how old you were when you started trying?
We were, oh God, you're making me mad.
Okay. Because you were talking about like being under 35 or over 35. So I'm
Yes,
just
we
curious
were.
with your story.
So we were, I think we were about, I was 29, like
Okay.
when we first started.
Hmm.
Um, but then, my 30th birthday kind of came and went and we hadn't been successful yet. And so we had been, so by the time we actually got into a fertility clinic, I was like 31, I think, by the time like I
Hmm.
finally got to do diagnostic testing.
I see. Okay. And when you first did that first round of diagnostic testing, was there anything that came back as a red flag?
Nope. And
No.
so I was finally able to get my referral to see the fertility specialist while my husband was deployed. I went and did all the diagnostics while he was deployed. I even went and I think I had my HSG done on my birthday that year. So much
Okay.
fun.
So
But
much
when the
fun.
clinic calls and says like, okay, hey, like this is the day we need to, you need to come and do this. It's like, okay, like
I'll do it.
You say
Yeah.
yes, just,
Right.
you're on a
Right.
clock.
Yeah. What was your experience like with the HSG? Because I've heard stories saying that it was horrible, and I've heard stories saying that it wasn't a big deal. What was your experience with it?
I honestly, I don't remember too much about the first one.
Uh-huh.
I mean, other than maybe just having like mild cramping and it just being like kind of painful, like in the moment, but it's brief, but then the cramping kind of lasts a little bit. That's something I wanted to do on my birthday.
Right.
Or,
Definitely.
or that I'm like, oh man, this feels fun.
Right.
Um, but every time we've moved, we've had to start and redo diagnostics at every single new clinic. Um,
Hmm.
so we've had a lot of
Yeah.
those over the years. Like I remember going into my last one, gosh, I don't know, maybe 12 months ago. And they were like trying to like tell me all of it. And I'm like, I know, like this is like my fourth one of these. Like you don't need to go through all this with me. And she's, oh,
Right.
okay. Like
Yeah.
she's like, that sucks. And I was like, yeah, it does.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, tell me a little bit about once you did start to seek fertility treatments or you qualified to start fertility treatments. Tell me a little bit about that experience. Maybe just like, I know that you did some IUIs, so tell me like that experience and then we can go into the next stage.
Yeah. So when we did the diagnostics, everything came back, kind of normal. Some of my hormone levels were a little off, but like wasn't, pointing at one thing or another. So when my husband came back from deployment, he did all his testing and all that came back normal. And so the plan that we came up with was, well, we're going to try 3 IUIs and see if that works. They thought that maybe it was an egg quality, they couldn't really tell. We were just diagnosed with unexplained infertility. And so shortly after he came home from being deployed, he did the diagnostics and then we got right on the schedule and did our first IUI. And it was successful. And like, couldn't believe it. Like, after all this time, we finally got our positive test. And then, in true military fashion, we got orders. And we were moving to Darien, Illinois, which is outside of Chicago. And we had about 3 weeks' notice. And we had to sell our house, navigate, this like new phase of like, okay, so this procedure worked, but we're going to be moving when I'm about 6 weeks pregnant. What does that look like? Because, most times when you're with a clinic, they keep you there till about 8 to 10 weeks, sometimes even a little bit
Right.
longer. And so that was kind of scary. And, we have all these emotions and then we've got to turn around and figure out how to sell a house really quick and how to find a house in a new city, in a new state on such short notice. And so it was a whirlwind. And we
Yeah.
moved. And during that move, unfortunately, we experienced our first miscarriage while we were driving cross country. And that wasn't fun.
Mhm.
Because, we're in the emergency room until, I don't know, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. The ER doctor is like, we want you to, follow up with your OB like tomorrow. And I'm like, yeah, my OB's in Arizona and we're moving to Chicago. Like, we still have 5 days of driving. Like, can't really do that. And he's like, okay, well, when you get to Chicago, go get some follow-up care, make sure everything's okay.
Mhm.
Uh, and, all I wanted to do was stay in the hotel room and curl up in a ball and cramps and you're bleeding and you're sad and you're emotional and the hormones and all of that. But we had to keep driving.
Right.
Um, and then,
Yeah.
we got there and it was trying to set up care and get the follow-up care, which took 33 days to
Oh.
get set up and to be seen. And in those 33 days, I had probably a panic attack every day because I thought I was dying or that there was something wrong or that this wasn't normal. And Dr. Google is not your friend in that moment. And so
Yeah.
it was a lot. And we're still trying, we
Definitely.
had to search for a house and then we had to like move into the new house and do all of that and manage all the emotions. And
Right.
I don't know
Yeah.
that we ever really grieved that one the way we should have
Yeah.
because of the
Absolutely.
life circumstances.
definitely. And I'm so sorry for your loss. And I know there's a little bit more to that as well. And I think your story is very unique because of the all of the moving around that you had to do, and like even just that small part of that story you mentioned, like you're on the road in the middle of the move and you're dealing with this extremely unfortunate situation, and you didn't have a doctor you could follow up with and all of
Mhm.
that. So that is a very unique, part of your story that you mentioned this earlier too. You're constantly having to find new doctors everywhere you went. So, um, yeah, tell me a little
Mhm.
bit about how just with on that being a military family like, affected your timeline of everything.
I mean, it definitely delayed us. I mean, even, while we were still in Arizona, we couldn't really pursue fertility treatments until my husband's deployment ended. And
Right.
he was gone for just about a year, from start to finish. And, that's a whole year we couldn't do anything.
Right.
And then every time we move, we probably experience, I would guess, at maybe about 6 months of added wait time or delays while we're waiting to establish care, because we have to establish care with our primary care manager first, and then we have to wait to get a referral. And then
Mhm.
sometimes there's a wait list at the clinic, and then the clinic needs to do their own diagnostics. And then and so that's a process. And to do that,
Definitely.
we've moved 5 times in the last 7 years.
Wow.
And so doing that every time, it gets exhausting.
Definitely. Definitely. So what was the next course of action after that first loss?
Well, we got established, in Illinois. Like I said, we have to set up with our new primary care manager, and then we have to get referrals, and then we have to start over at a new clinic.
Mhm.
And that clinic wants to do their own diagnostics. And so, after that, and when our doctor, in Illinois ran everything, she agreed with our first doctor in Arizona that, 3 IUIs and then, proceed to IVF if that's not successful. And so she built off of, what our first doctor did, adjusted, and added progesterone support, um, at different stages for the second IUI, which was also successful.
Mhm.
We felt relieved, and we made it to the point where we, saw the heartbeat, and they felt confident releasing us to our OB. And then my husband had drill weekends. So my husband's, in the Army Reserve, but he works full time for the Army Reserve, but he still does his drill weekends. And so it was drill weekend. And so I had to go to that first OB appointment by myself. And at that appointment, they could not find a heartbeat. And so I had experienced a missed miscarriage, which, my body thought we were still pregnant,
Mhm.
but the baby, had unfortunately died. And so we had a lot of choices to make in that moment. Do we wait to see if my body is going to recognize it, and, and I'll experience a miscarriage naturally? Do I need to take some medications to make that miscarriage happen sooner? Or am I going to need a DNC? Or do I want to do a DNC right off the bat? Because if you go with choices A and B, you still might need the DNC in the end anyways.
Right.
We had a trip to go, visit some family out of state, in Texas, and then we were going to go from Texas to Pennsylvania for a wedding. And so we were like, I think plan C is going to be our best option, because we didn't want to have to then jeopardize the trip that we had spent all this money on.
Right.
And so we did that. And that was a lot, because at that point, now, okay, I'm having a procedure done. It's surgery. I probably need to tell my parents that I'm having surgery and things like
Mhm.
that, because complications can happen. And so that was kind of where we first started telling our family what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
Because we hadn't really told them about our infertility. We hadn't told them really about the first loss. And so it was now all of a sudden we're talking about it. And it was October. So it was also Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month. And so that kind of shifted some things in my brain that,
Yeah.
okay, people do talk about this. Maybe they don't talk about it as much as necessary because it's oh so common to
Right.
experience this. And so we started sharing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was definitely a catalyst for things to come. And one of the major turning points that has led me to where I am today.
Yeah. That's an interesting topic to talk about because everyone has their own feelings about sharing what's going on with their fertility journey or choosing not to share. Some people choose to share with friends and family, and some couples want to keep that personal. So how did you feel? So you mentioned that you start after the second loss, you started to share with your family. Was that helpful for you to share, or was that did that make things harder? What are your feelings about sharing what you're going through? Because
You
obviously you're
know,
very open now.
yeah, oh, I'm totally an open book. It was um it made things easier, but it also made some things a little bit more difficult. There was this burden that was kind of lifted off of my husband and I that, we weren't hiding this anymore. We were being real and we could explain like why we couldn't do things or why we couldn't afford a trip, to visit. We got asked that all the time, and I think it's so common within the military community. Our families, want us to come visit, because we're not with them. But then explaining, well, we're trying to pay for IVF, so we really can't afford to do that. We're also doing IVF and need to be nearby for all the ultrasounds and the monitoring and all that. And so it's like we can't really just drop everything and go and do something. And so it helped some people understand. But then, because we were open and sometimes shared some of those, like when we were going in for certain procedures. And so then it was people were trying to like ask the questions. Well, so did it work? So that made
Uh-huh.
it, so I mean, it was good and bad.
Definitely.
I'm definitely glad that, we chose to do that. And I mean, I think the way that that has positively impacted my life was really meaningful,
Uh-huh.
and was what I needed to do. But I also recognize that that's not helpful for everybody. For
Right.
me, sharing and talking about it was therapeutic. But for
Right.
others, I recognize that that's not the same. And so everybody has to make their own choice in what is best
Definitely.
for them.
Yeah, because on like you said, on one side, it's freeing to be open about what you're going through, and on the other side, it can be hard because then people start asking questions,
Hmm.
right? Like, how are your fertility treatments going, or was it successful? And maybe you might not be ready to share those things as well. So that's definitely it's hard, but I'm sure it is definitely freeing to share with your loved ones what you're going through, so you can have that support. But definitely
Hmm.
a very personal decision. Okay, so tell me what was the next step then going into, so that was that the second or third
That was the
IUI?
second
That
one.
that was the second. And so then did you pursue another?
We did.
Okay.
We didn't jump into it right, as quickly as we want because I had the DNC, and so my body needed more time, to recover. And so we were able to do another transfer in January of 2020, which ended in another miscarriage. My husband was actually out of town when that happened. It's so funny how we're always doing something for the military.
Uh-huh.
We were moving across country. My husband had drill weekend, and now he was out of town when we experienced our third one. And at that point, it was okay. Now we're gonna schedule our IVF consult.
Uh-huh.
We couldn't do that until late April. And so this is, late January. And so we were like, so our doctor asked, well, do you want to do one Hail Mary?
Right.
Um, and so we decided we were going to do our fourth and final IUI while we waited for our IVF consult. We had started doing all the injections, started, taking all the meds, doing all the things. And we were, approximately, 2 to 3 days away from doing the trigger shot when COVID shut down the world and
Mhm.
canceled that cycle, which, I know that there were, thousands and thousands of people that probably experienced very similar things. And it was just so heartbreaking because we had convinced ourselves like, okay, we're just going to do this like one last one. And, maybe it'll be what we need and we won't have to do the IVF. And then
Right.
the world stopped basically. And we had no idea when or if we would be able to pursue doing anything. That was hard.
Yeah, definitely. COVID affected a lot of people in negative ways, but that is something that I think was really hard for a lot of people, having this hope of having a family and then getting IVF cycles canceled or IUI cycles canceled, and that is definitely a really hard thing that
I mean, and it's
COVID
still
brought on us.
a lot. The medications that we took for
Yeah,
nothing. The
right,
hell I put my body through for nothing. We,
right.
was very frustrating. Um,
Yeah, I imagine.
we
Yeah,
can't undo it.
definitely.
We can learn from
Yeah,
it.
right, exactly. And so then with COVID hitting, what did the timeline look like for IVF? Because that sounds like something that further delayed
Hmm.
your your treatment, right? Like you're being a military family and moving and all of that definitely delayed your treatment. But how did that timeline look now that COVID had hit?
Yeah, I mean, it took the clinic a little while to work things out and to figure out, what the plan was moving forward. And so thankfully, they were able to convert our consultation to a virtual appointment. So we were still able to hold that appointment in late April and, come up with a plan. And, even at that point, in April of 2020, they still didn't really know, well, when will it be safe for the clinics to reopen? They were fairly confident that they would do it in stages, but they still didn't really know. And so we just had to wait with not really knowing anything and knowing, and so when they finally reopened, and I don't know the exact order that they reopened, but it was something like, like cancer, fertility preservation, those kinds of
Right.
appointments were very time specific. Those were the first people that they like reopened to. And then they reopened, I think, to those that were over 40 first. And
Mm.
so it was like, when they finally started reopening, we were like, okay, maybe soon we'll be able to do it. Um, and, during that time, I got involved with Resolve and their Federal Advocacy Day. I think the frustration of COVID, the frustration of paying for everything out of pocket without insurance coverage, and the fact that their event went virtual, really gave me, I think, permission to go ahead and get involved and try to take the pain and the frustration that I was experiencing and do something to change it for the next generation.
Right.
And that is another one of those points or moments where those decisions and what I did then has really led me to where I am today.
Absolutely.
And it was, I mean, it was life changing, like in the best way
Mhm.
possible.
Yeah.
Um, and then, it was shortly after that we got word that we could do that we could begin the process to prep my body for IVF and for the egg retrieval, which we were able to do in July of 2020. We were able to do the
Okay.
egg retrieval.
Okay.
It was
Yeah, and it
phenomenal.
sounds like finally, and it sounds like getting involved as an like with Resolve and doing some work on infertility or volunteering and things like that was something that was therapeutic for you. Would you say that was
Yeah,
the
I mean,
case?
it definitely was. And it was a new way to channel the frustrations of this
Mm-hmm.
whole process, of not having the insurance coverage, of, the expense of it. And that was, I think, fueled by COVID, fueled
Yeah.
by our losses and how expensive it was because we were giving up the family trips. We gave up having a second car so that we could pay for this. We gave up date nights. Like we gave
Mm-hmm.
up everything. Like we dropped, Amazon Prime. Like we cut everything out of our lives that, those quality of life things that we all, have. I wasn't getting my nails done. I wasn't doing these things. Like we gave it all
Right.
up. And trust me, it was worth it. But it was frustrating that we had to give all that up.
Right. Right.
And so it was definitely something that I needed. And it also helped me connect with other people that had experienced similar things.
Right. Definitely. Yeah. So you then got the go ahead to start IVF. Tell me about that experience.
Oh, so many shots. I'm not a shot person. Like I definitely cannot, even like the little itty bitty needles, like I can't do those myself. Like
Yeah.
I hesitate too much and I don't know, I don't have the guts to do it to step myself. So I definitely relied on my husband for a lot of those. And I will tell you, like, if you have never done IVF and you've never done an egg retrieval, like, even like for your first protocol, like, that is a lot on your body. Um, like, you feel it, you start to bloat, you're hormonal, you're uncomfortable. Um, I mean, your ovaries are basically like taking over your abdomen, because they're getting so enlarged because they're trying to get the most eggs because you're spending all this money or, you're having this procedure, you want to get your bang for your buck, right? You want
Right.
it, you
Yeah.
want to have the most chances of, having that live birth. And so it was a lot. And it was so much so that after the egg retrieval, um, I ended up experiencing some severe like abdominal pain, went to the emergency room, was admitted into the hospital, all during COVID, which is not
Oh,
fun. Don't recommend,
yeah.
um, because like my husband really couldn't, come back there. Um, our doctor, oh my gosh, most amazing doctor ever. She did not have privileges at the hospital and it
Okay.
was COVID. So like they wouldn't let her in. Like she harassed my doctors. And I say harass like jokingly, but like it was like every time they came in, they were like, oh, your doctor called. Like, she was really worried about you. We keep updating her. Like, but she really wants to come
Oh,
examine you herself. And like, we can't let her. And,
oh. That's so
I,
sweet. That's the kind of doctor you
right,
need, right? That really cares about you.
right. And having, knowing, that she was really, like, she was so concerned because they didn't really think it was, hyperstimulation. Like,
Okay.
because I didn't have all of the symptoms, but that in the end, that's what I was diagnosed with in the end. They thought maybe it was like a ovarian torsion, like they couldn't really figure it out.
Wow.
I will say that I let me tell just gonna say this. ER
Yeah.
doctors, ER doctors are getting younger and younger.
Okay.
Like this kid, like, and like, you know, this kid is in the OR and he comes back with like my scans and like he just says, "Holy ovaries," and
Oh my gosh.
I'm like, "Pardon me?" He's like, I normally have a hard time finding ovaries like on these scans and stuff, but like yours are like your whole abdomen. That's just like one of
It,
those moments. I will never forget that. Like,
yeah, it sounds like a little unprofessional, maybe the way that that was
a little
presented
bit.
to
Like,
you.
I also think he was trying to like lighten the mood, but also like
Okay.
convey like the seriousness. But it was very
Right.
comical, like in the moment. Like he's like explaining how like, you know, ovaries are really hard to find on a scan, but because of all the fertility drugs, like they're just front and center on the scan. And he's like, I've never seen that before. Again,
Yeah.
he was a kid.
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Not
I don't
something
think
you
there's
want to hear when you're in the ER. Not something I've seen before, but if the doctor's
right,
young,
right.
then maybe
Uh,
that's not something they've
but
seen.
I also don't know how many people they get that come in, after doing, an egg retrieval where their ovaries are that enlarged.
Right.
So it was just comical and still one of those things that it's like sometimes like husband and I are being dramatic, we'll just joke like, holy over.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But um but because of that, it delayed being able to do a transfer. So
Right.
the plan was never to do a fresh transfer. We were always going to do a frozen transfer because of our losses and the unexplained infertility. Our doctor really thought that doing the genetic testing on the embryos was going to be the best decision to ensure that, there aren't any chromosomal abnormalities or anything like that that would lead us to have another loss
Right.
at that point. So, and then we also had a wedding that we were going to. My sister-in-law was getting married, postponed her big, wedding and decided to have a small, intimate COVID wedding. And so we were going to Seattle for that. So we were okay with, letting my body take an extra month to heal before trying to start the protocols for a frozen transfer.
So after you did the or so when you did your egg retrieval, how many eggs did you get?
I got 23.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
Okay.
That's a lot. I would say from my experience that working with people, that's a lot of eggs to get on an egg
Mhm.
retrieval. How did you feel about that?
We felt pretty good. We weren't, it was our first cycle. We weren't really sure what to expect. We didn't go in with like any expectations.
Hmm.
And then after, they were fertilized and developed and did all their things, we had 6 embryos that that they biopsied and sent for testing.
Okay.
And so then of those 6, 4 came back normal.
Do you end up having to wait between the retrieval and the
We did the retrieval was the end of July, and then we did a transfer in mid-October. So
a
two and a
little bit
half
of
months.
time to wait? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But they wanted to make sure that my body had a chance to rest, after the complications and things like that. So,
That's cool.
well
Okay.
then, ideally what we wanted, gotta do what you gotta do
That's
and
right.
follow,
Yeah.
that's what our doctor thought was best. And so we weren't gonna second guess her opinion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So then how did the first transfer turn out?
Well, I've got a 3-year-old daughter now, so uh, you know,
Amazing.
yeah, so it went well. We did have some complications. We experienced a bleed, I think around 9 weeks,
Okay.
which was like so terrifying because we were like, I thought we were good. Like they put me on bed rest and it was like a whole thing. Like they didn't even want me like standing up to like decorate the Christmas tree. Like,
Oh,
and so that was really hard. But, we've got, I refer to her as my three-nager right now. Um,
oh,
that like sass and she's fighting for the independence and control over her own life, but she's
yeah.
also 3 and doesn't get to have that control.
Right.
Um, and after, so after the bleed and that subsided, I did end up developing gestational diabetes as well.
Okay.
So that was not so fun. Had to get over my fear of needles a little bit because like I had to do the finger pricks, like
Right.
I had to do it more often than like my husband was able to be at home to do. So like I had to do
Right.
that and didn't like that.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so you were able to conceive, and now you have a 3-year-old daughter with that very first round of IVF. So that is
Mhm.
amazing. After everything you went through, you finally got your little miracle baby. How did that feel when you were finally able to, you know, hold your daughter in your arms?
I mean, it was amazing. It was quite the ordeal.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if you remember the tornado outbreak in June 21 in the Chicago area.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So we lived in Darien. There was the tornado that went through Woodbridge. Is that the town? Yeah, I think so.
That sounds right.
And then it like kind of came into Darien. Um, so that was like the night before they decided that they were going to induce me was the
Mm-hmm.
tornado. Like, so we drove through like all of like the tornado chaos the next morning to go to my OB appointment where they decided because of the gestational diabetes that they were going to induce me. Um, and then we, um, when she was born, I mean, it was magical and it was like great. But there were some complications too. I ended
Mm-hmm.
up needing to have an episiotomy done because her head wouldn't come out.
Okay. Oh,
And then she was having some trouble and spent some time in the NICU after being
okay.
born. But when we finally brought her home, like it was the most amazing feeling. Like it was like it shouldn't have taken this long, but like here we are. We've
Right.
got our rainbow, we've got our miracle. Um, and then we were preparing to move
Yeah.
in true
With a
military
newborn.
fashion with a newborn.
Yeah.
If you just don't unless you have to move with
Just
newborn.
don't.
Just don't.
Yeah.
Just been there, done that. Wouldn't recommend it.
Right. Yeah.
But I
Um,
mean, we,
so yeah. So when you were preparing to move, how old was your daughter?
so she moved at about 4.5 weeks old.
Okay. Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a
Um,
long 2 days of driving.
definitely, definitely. I'm sure a lot of stops in between.
Oh, yeah.
So how long was it between like when you first started trying to conceive until the birth of your daughter?
About 6 years.
6 years. Okay. Okay. And so now you have your three-nager, and tell
Mhm.
me a little bit about, I know when we talked, you told me that your dream was to always have two kids, right? So tell
Mhm.
me what happened thereafter having your daughter with your dream of having another child.
Yeah. Well, military life kind of got a little bit in the way.
Mm-hmm.
But not entirely. We knew we wanted, I mean, I knew I wanted to try and breastfeed for a year. We didn't want to have kids like super close, but not super far apart either. And so we wanted to like wait a year. Um,
Right.
we also knew that we were only going to be at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas for 10 to 12 months. My husband was selected for a resident school there at Fort Leavenworth, and the school was only 10 months long. So we knew we weren't going to be there long enough to pursue anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so we didn't. We waited to see where we were going to go. And so just after my daughter turned 1, we moved from Fort Leavenworth, Kansas to Schuylkill Haven, Pennsylvania. And so then that's when we knew we would be able um, to try
Mm-hmm.
again because, we always dreamed of having 2 kids. That was what we both wanted. We felt very strongly about that. But then things kind of changed about a month before we moved. So there was a Supreme Court decision that kind of changed a lot of things. There was bills that were introduced that would potentially threaten IVF, threaten the ability to store or have embryos. And Pennsylvania was one of those states that had introduced some legislation that could, depending on the wording, of the final bill, make IVF illegal, essentially, or making having embryos like illegal and things like that.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so we kind of paused and we were like, okay, we need to see where this bill goes, see what this election in November holds.
Right.
And while we waited, my mother-in-law unfortunately passed. And so we, hopped on a last minute flight out to Seattle and spent most of the month of September in Seattle, saying our goodbyes, spending time with family and, dealing with all the things that need to be done after a loved one passes. And, that was a really hard time, but it also helped us not focus on the other things that we were trying to focus on because we were in this waiting pattern.
Right.
And then after the election, it looked like things were safe. And so it took me about 2 months of back and forth with my primary care manager to get my referral done the right way. Our small town doctors just wanted us to see their in-house, reproductive endocrinologist, but their in-house person didn't accept our insurance, and our insurance requires referrals to go through the insurance company, not just like an in-house referral the way that some offices do that. Like you needed like the legit referral, but they didn't understand that. Like it was like a whole thing, a whole 2 months of back and forth. And then we had to wait another 2 months after that to be seen at our new clinic in Pennsylvania. And so it wasn't until February of 22 that we were finally able to start that process. And they told us like, oh, it should be really easy. Like, it sounds like, what your clinic did, was really successful. We'll probably follow the same protocols. It'll take us probably about 4 months to review all your files, to review the embryo information, and to transfer your embryos from Illinois to Pennsylvania. It'll take about approximately 4 months.
It's a long time.
It took 10.
Oh. Wow.
I think there's just some bureaucracy. The clinics didn't really want to talk to each other. They wanted to go through me, which is really a lot. Like, don't have the time to sit and go back and forth and like check the two different like it's a lot. Like I got other stuff that I'm doing. I've got a toddler like that is eating, and so it was a process. And so it wasn't until October of last year that we were able to do our second embryo transfer after forever of trying to get all the embryo, like trying to get the embryos there and then get on the schedule, and a lot of waiting. We're always waiting. We like to say, hurry up and wait in the military. We did a whole lot of that.
That's like the whole theme of your story.
Yes, it really, really could be. It was successful again. Like we couldn't believe that, wow, we were pregnant again, except in December, around 8 weeks, I started experiencing some bleeding again. A subchorionic, I had a bleed. It's fairly common with IVF pregnancies. They don't really know why. And
was it subchorionic hematoma?
Yeah, hemorrhage, hematoma, bleed. It's like 5 different names to all mean the same thing.
Right.
And so they just, we had to go to the ER, but because of where we were in such a small, remote mountain town, that it was an hour drive to the ER. Our local ER did not have maternal fetal medicine or any OBs on staff. So we had to drive about an hour for that. And we ended up having to go to the emergency room 5 times in a 6-week period. And each time, you know, okay, you're bleeding. The bleeding would usually kind of stop after a point. Baby always looked healthy.
Uh-huh.
But the last time it wasn't. Baby was fine, but the bleeding was much heavier this time. Baby seemed fine. And then all of a sudden, I just started having contractions. And at first, it was just a very large blood clot. Baby still seemed fine. They were trying to get me a bed up in the maternity ward. And they finally wheeled me up. I ended up delivering the baby in the hallway on the gurney while they're trying to get me up there. Had some pretty extensive bleeding. The placenta wasn't delivering. It was very traumatic, happened very fast. Wasn't at the threshold where I needed a blood transfusion, but they gave me an iron transfusion. And I mean, it was a very serious incident. Lost a lot of blood. It was very traumatic. Not exactly the way we thought that would go. Weeks before, at Christmas, we told our immediate family that we were pregnant again. And, now it's like all coming undone. And so at that point in our pregnancy, we were about 15 and a half weeks pregnant. And nearly lost my life. I had to have a 6th emergency room visit about a week later. Thought I was having a heart attack because I was having chest pains. I was having vision problems. My husband was gone for work. Had to drive myself and thankfully, because it wasn't maternity related, it was just heart related. Like I could go to the emergency room that was just down the road.
And
but
you
it was
were
like
probably taking care of a toddler too.
so and it was like a whole ordeal. And it ended up taking me probably about 3 months to fully recover. And then in April, I had another procedure where they still found retained pregnancy materials that was still months later still in my body. And then in late June, I finally got the call that like we were all clear and we could do another round. And I was like, yeah, I'm moving in like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And so, and during, shortly after we experienced our loss in late January, everything happened with Alabama. And so it's like, there's just a lot.
A lot going on all at once.
Yeah. And now we're living, we just moved again. I can't even get in to see my primary care physician until December. So I can't even get a referral. And at this point, we're not sure what we want to do.
Yeah, not sure. After everything you've gone through, it sounds like it's a lot to think about if that's something you want to pursue again. Is that?
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of people in this community that have faced the decisions that, my husband and I are faced with, whether you're still trying for your first or you're trying to expand your family and knowing when is it enough? When are you just ready to throw in the towel? When is it not worth risking your life?
Right.
All of the different things that are swirling around. And then also, worried about, will IVF even still be legal?
Right.
What if what if we're transferred to a state where I might not even be able to access care if I'm experiencing a miscarriage?
Right.
Like, and that all weighs and adds to the decision, and it's muddy and it's messy and it's emotional and
It's a lot to consider. Absolutely. Yeah. So it sounds like you're in this spot right now where you're just not sure exactly what the future holds. Do you have embryos stored in the state that you live in currently, or is that something you would have to consider as well?
They're still in Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.
And so where we're stationed currently, there is not an in-network clinic nearby. And so we would have to drive about 2 hours. At that point, what's another 2 hours on top of that just to go back to our other clinic? Like,
Right.
because we don't have to deal with the transferring the embryos to a new clinic and doing all that. And there's a lot that goes into it.
Right. Definitely. Definitely. Yeah. So it sounds like you're still considering what the future holds for you.
Yeah, we're leaning towards we might just need to accept our new reality that our dream of a family of four might just have to be a family of three.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. And I am so sorry for all of your losses. I think that it's amazing that you're willing to share because I think that can help so many people who are going through a similar thing to hear your story and hear how strong you are and how you have an amazing 3-year-old daughter from everything that you went through. And I just really appreciate you sharing your story with us.
Yeah, no, it's truly an honor, Becca. Humanizing, what we all go through. I mean, I remember when I first started on this journey, there weren't people talking about it,
Mm-hmm.
and now more and more celebrities are talking about it. I mean,
Right.
the news is talking about IVF like all
Right.
the time now. It's crazy to see how things have just changed in just my 8-year journey. And
Mm-hmm.
if I can play a part in changing that for the next generation, like I'm more than happy to be able to do that.
That's amazing. Well, I would love for you to share a little bit about everything you're doing with the Building Military Families Network and just share a little bit about that and how that organization can help military families.
Yeah. So, building Military Families Network, really came out of, some of the frustrations that I had. I was frustrated that there wasn't a military organization doing anything to support families that were dealing with infertility, navigating pregnancy loss, navigating adoption or any of those things. And, there were several points, where my life changed and where I was going, the direction that I was being pulled, was changing. And, getting involved with Resolve and doing that advocacy, I think opened my eyes to this whole other world of organizations and businesses that were supporting the family building community. And I just was so frustrated that there wasn't a military organization doing that for the military community.
Right.
As military families, we experience things very different, similar to, those of our, civilian peers, but there's different stressors, there's different pieces that are moving and that are a part of our lives. And having an organization that understands that and that can support that was lacking.
Right.
And I got tired of waiting around for somebody else to do it. And so I was like, okay, somebody needs to do this. There's the need. And I think that is probably the number one thing that I hear about people, that find Building Military Families Network. And they're like, I had no idea this like was around. Like, oh my gosh, this is so needed in our community. Thank you for doing this. And so, what we aim to do is we want to be that empowering and supportive environment for the military and veteran community to be able to come when they're struggling with family building, regardless of what that family building issue is it a deployment, is it infertility, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
be able to find the support that they need through our support groups, the information that they need on their options on, what is PCOS, what is this, what does that mean? What does that look
Right.
like? What are the TRICARE policies? And then connect them to resources that can help if our organization doesn't have the ability to help with something directly. And so we've got
Yeah.
this vast resource library that, can link people to other organizations and other companies that are there to help so
Yeah.
that they don't have to do the research. They don't have to wade through Google. As
Right.
Google's
It's
loving
all
when
in
you
one place.
put things in a search, right? And so
Right.
it's one place. And that, we
Yeah.
really want to be that community to support the military and veteran families that are struggling with this because let's face it, it's like the worst club to be in, but with the best
Mm-hmm.
members.
Right.
And so
Definitely.
we're supporting that
Yeah.
club.
That's amazing that you started that, and all of those resources for military families, I'm sure are so helpful. That's wonderful that everything you went through just kind of brought you to starting this organization and wanting to help others. So that's
Mhm.
wonderful. Is there anything else you want to share about like the work you're doing or building military families, or you can obviously share the website and where to connect with you and all that. I love that.
Yeah, so our website is buildingmilitaryfamiliesnetwork.org. And that's where people can register for our support groups. They can find our education center and our resources. And then, we also are, in the advocacy space. We are working, to support legislation that's going to benefit our military and veteran community. And so we take the stories, from our community and the needs that we're hearing, and we turn that into action to hopefully improve things for the next generation so that organizations
Wonderful.
might, have to shift and, adjust what they're doing because we solve the problems, at
Mm-hmm.
least us to care and things like that. So
Right.
we do that.
Wonderful. 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 Well, I'll link all of that in the show notes so people can connect with you or connect with the organization if they would like. And thank you so much for being here today, Julie. That was awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
It's always an honor. And thank you for having me, Becca.
Of course.